Hello, today is August 26th, 2009. We're meeting today with Mr. Alfred Laser at his home in Johnstown, Colorado. My name is Brad Hoops. I'm the interviewer for the Northern Colorado Veterans History Project. Welcome, Al, and thanks for participating in the project today. Let's start out, if we could, tell us a little bit about yourself, your date of birth, where you were born, a little bit about your family.
Well, I was born and grew up in north central Ohio. I was born in 1926. I was the third of 7 children, and we were farmers.
Did you grow up out on the farm, or what was the nearest town?
The best way to define that would be make a triangle out of the towns of Shelby, Shiloh, and Plymouth.
Okay.
And we were right in the center of the triangle. My dad had 154 acres, general farming, some dairy cattle, some sheep, hogs. He raised some beef.
Where
and lots of work.
and lots of work. Where were you in order of the 7 children?
I was the third.
Third. Okay. Okay. So you grew up on the farm, went through the school system there on the farm?
I went to the same school for 12 years, graduated in 1944.
Okay. Where were you when you heard, and what were you thinking when you heard Pearl Harbor had been bombed? Do you remember?
Not a whole lot. I remember the event. I remember that evening. We sat around and what's going to happen next. All of a sudden, we all became patriotic.
Yeah. And you were still obviously too young. You would have been
yeah.
only 15 or so, so
Yeah.
the war was still off for you. So when you graduated, you said in 44?
Right.
What'd you do after that? Did you get drafted, or did you work for a while? Did you enlist? Take your story from there.
Well, I hung around I finished school in May, and I hung around on the farm until September.
Well, now, being on the farm, could you have gotten an exemption from the war?
I had one long enough to finish school.
Oh, really?
Which
Okay.
was something like 6 months. And I could not enlist. Enlistments were closed at that time, so I had to wait for the draft board to call me.
Okay.
And then I got that letter from the greetings from the President of the United States. Your presence is required.
And now you said that was in September of
September of 44. And I went to the receiving station at Fort Hays in Columbus, Ohio, and I was given a choice of services, so I selected the Navy.
Now that leads to the question: how did a farm boy from landlocked Ohio choose to go to the Navy? Why'd you choose that branch of service over the others?
Probably I had heard rumors that there was opportunities to learn a trade there.
Oh, okay.
And then when I got to Great Lakes, I had to take a bunch of tests. I don't know what you call them. Ability to determine a person's ability.
Okay, all right.
And a few days later, I was called in to a visit with a counselor. And he told me that I had scored high enough in mechanical aptitude that he would recommend me for the engineering department on a ship if that was acceptable by me. Of course, I knew nothing about a ship or engineering or anything else, so I said, sure. He didn't tell me how hot that was going to be.
Oh, geez. How was that? We'll back up and we'll move forward with your story here. How was that transition going from civilian life to military life for you? Was that much of a transition? And particularly in the sense that along the lines, back in those days, a lot of your generation really didn't travel too far away from home. Probably you were around the farm quite a bit. Now you're away from home. How was the transition? Was there homesickness and all that kind of stuff?
There was a little bit of that, but it was a bigger jolt. I can't define how devoid of street smarts I was when I went into the Navy. And we had experts there that were just plenty willing to fill in those gaps, and most of it was wrong.
But you had no choice but to follow the...
Well, this was unofficial.
Oh, okay.
I heard a lot of talk about people that could not differentiate between human genders. I learned later, they didn't know what they were talking about either. What they were just defining was masochists,
Oh, jeez.
not homosexuals.
Yeah. So there in Great Lakes, did you stay for train? Did you just do your basic there, or did you stay for that additional engineering training, or take your story from Great Lakes then?
I think I had 10 or 12 weeks of basic training, and then I got a few days leave, went back and was enrolled in a basic engineering program, which was just about as basic as it's possible to get. Things like how to hold a file and how to use a hacksaw, and yeah, you just can't get any more basic than that was.
Huh. And that was there at Great Lakes?
That was at Great Lakes.
Okay.
And from there I went to Philadelphia and was assigned to the light cruiser, the Oklahoma City. And it was a new ship just back from its shakedown cruise.
And for those that are watching the tape, a shakedown cruise is when it's built, it's taken out, and all the bugs are worked out.
That's exactly right.
Okay. Okay.
Take it out to see if the guns are going to fire straight, if the machinery is all going to work. It's just a test drive.
Right. Right. Okay. So you're assigned to that. That's so in the way of engineering, all you got in the way of training was just that initial basic.
That's all. And then on board the ship, I was assigned to what they at that time called the A Division for auxiliaries. That included generators, evaporators, boat engines, and that sort of stuff. Air compressors.
So
I changed a lot of oil in air compressors.
So it sounds like it basically was just on-the-job training then.
That's
you,
all.
You got on and
I recall changing oil in a big air compressor one time, and I had 4 or 5 gallons of used oil, and no one would tell me where to dispose of it. And that went on for 4 or 5 days, and I couldn't get an answer from anyone. So one night, the light came on. After it got dark, I just threw it overboard.
wow. So once you were assigned to the Oklahoma City there in Philly, how long were you guys in port before you went out to sea then?
Oh, probably a week.
And how was that? Now here, once again, here's a farm boy from Ohio, out to sea. Did you get your sea legs, or how was that adjusting to life on the sea?
Well, there was one deficiency in all the training that I had. They didn't tell me a single thing about life aboard a ship. So I had to learn that as I stumbled around. And of course I got some unofficial indoctrination. This group that I was assigned to had been previously on the USS Milwaukee that was taken to Murmansk, Russia, and decommissioned. And a lot of these guys came back. I don't know how they got back, but they came back and were assigned to the new ship, the Oklahoma City. So one of the things that they impressed upon me was that thievery just absolutely was not tolerated, and except if it were food. If you could scrounge up something that's good to eat, that's acceptable. So 2 or 3 days later, I was wandering around late in the evening, and I found a little room. The door was open, and there was a box that had 6 or 8, maybe 10 tall cans of grapefruit juice in it. I thought, well, this is just waiting for somebody to have it, so I picked it up and took it to the evaporator room. I was asked right away, where did you find this? I didn't know anything about the ship, so I described the room that I'd been in. These guys kind of turned a little bit white and said, you've just raided the chief petty officer's galley.
Oh, wow.
But they drank it.
Yeah, of course. Speaking of life on the ship, how was it as far as your accommodations, the food? Talk a little bit about life. And what kind of ship was the Oklahoma City? I guess
Oh, it was a light cruiser.
Light cruiser? Maybe you said that.
I don't know how they arrived at their designations. It had 6-inch caliber guns on it, 12 of them, and a bunch of 5-inch guns that were used for anti-aircraft defense.
Okay.
And we all had a battle station. And I ended up with being assigned to the #1 whale boat. That's just a small boat that's used to run errands in port, which would also accommodate the captain if we had to abandon the ship.
Okay.
And I got to thinking, if we're ever attacked by an airplane, I'm in an awful vulnerable position.
Sure. Huh?
So I looked around and I decided if I could see it coming and if I could get on the other side of one of those gun turrets, that probably would be the safest place that I could be. But it never occurred to me that there might be an airplane coming from the other way too. And I had no training in running a boat. I mean, none. So we lost an airplane one day. And I happened to be on the boat crew that went out to rescue the pilot. Of course, I was 19 years old, nervous and uninformed. They lowered us into the water. And my first concern was, I've got to get this engine running. So I had it running as soon as we hit the water. And the guys had not released the fall lines that lowered the boat. And I pulled an awful boner. There were big swells, and the boat I was in would rise. That would allow it to go forward, then that big swell would leave, and then it would swing backwards. And after a while, I realized what I had done wrong. I shut the engine down, they got the fall lines loose, and then we went out to the airplane, which was floating upside down. And the pilot was hanging on to the big pontoon. We picked him up, brought him back. A few days later, they had him flying again.
Huh. Well, let's back up then, because now we're getting into some action there. From where did you guys go from? Tell your story from Philadelphia. Where did you guys ship off to then?
Our next port of call was Guantanamo Bay.
Hmm.
And from there we went to Panama and through the canal.
What was that like? Can you describe what going through the canals like?
I'm a little bit tainted on that because I worked there 2 years.
Oh yeah.
Everything that I'm talking about was a big gee whiz experience because it was a whole new world.
Oh, you bet.
I was fortunate enough to not be on duty when we went through the locks on the Atlantic side, so I got to watch that operation, and I was duly impressed. And by the time we got to the Pacific side, I was back down in the engine room. All of this machinery that I've described was in an engineering compartment, and it was hot. I just can't define how hot it was all the time. And of course, we were in a tropical climate all the time. We had adequate ventilation, but the air that they were bringing in was 90 to 100 degrees all the time, so that didn't help much. But after we left Panama, our next stop was the Hawaiian Islands. We were in Pearl Harbor, in and out of there for about a week or 10 days on maneuvers with other ships. And by being in this boat crew, I made trips to the fleet post office. So one day, one of the guys in my division got in the boat with me, and with the rest of our crew, I think there were 5 of us in the boat. We went to the fleet post office and tied up to the dock, and this guy got out and he said, "I'll see you." I said, "Where are you going?" He said, "I'll see you." I've never seen him yet.
Oh, is that right?
So the next morning, he didn't answer roll call. And I was one of 3 or 4 or 5 that knew what happened to him. Some guy with more sturdy sea legs than mine came to me and he said, "You keep your mouth shut." And the manhunt was on for Epton, which was his name. And I even helped to hunt. 10 days or 2 weeks later, I was transferred off the ship. And to this day, I think somebody knew that I knew what happened to Epton, and he got me out of the way.
Is that right? Wow.
We had a young officer in Ensign Richards that was just a real nice guy. And he's the only one that came to me and wished me well on my new assignment. And I think he's the guy that had me transferred. If that's the case, he kept me out of the brig. Long afterward, I got back on that ship as a visitor, and I found out that Epton had been found in downtown Honolulu, drunk and disheveled, and he had to perform a bunch of extra duty. And then he was put back to work in his usual capacity.
So only you on that in your party was the only one transferred off?
I don't know if anyone else in the party was transferred off.
Oh, that's interesting.
We transferred to another ship.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's when I went from the Oklahoma City to the Yosemite, and that took place in San Pedro Bay in the Philippine Islands. That's between Leyte and Samar.
Oh, so you continued on with the Oklahoma City till you got to the Philippines?
Yeah.
Okay. Huh. Once again, on the Yosemite capacity as an engineer in the engineering room?
Yes.
Okay.
We didn't spend much time at sea because it was a repair ship. They were repairing destroyers and providing them with fuel and other provisions while they were tied up alongside. But that's when the Okinawa campaign was going on. And that's when the Japanese kamikaze became famous.
Oh, geez.
And they were doing significant damage to these destroyers. The destroyers were providing protection for the aircraft carriers.
Mm-hmm.
The target for the kamikaze was an aircraft carrier because they were the ones that were taking the war to the Japanese.
Mm-hmm.
So those damaged ships would come down and tie up alongside our ship. And we had a repair division. We had a bunch of guys there that were just absolute geniuses. They made repairs that I couldn't imagine. They repaired ships that under any other circumstance would have gone back to a Navy yard somewhere. And of course, when they would get compartments sealed off and get the seawater pumped out of them, they would find a few sailors in there. And when I knew that was going on, I would manage to be someplace else.
Oh, boy, yeah. So during the Okinawa campaign, did you ship out with the Armada, or would these ships come back to you, or how
Well,
would
they would come back to us. We were anchored in the Philippine
Oh,
Islands.
okay.
But while I was on the Oklahoma City, we were part of Task Force 38.1. And there's another thing. I had no idea where we were. I knew I was in the Pacific Ocean, but they never told us anything.
Wow.
And these airplanes, I could see them departing from aircraft carriers and see them coming back. And once I remember seeing an airplane pushed over the side, so it was probably not worth salvaging.
Wow.
And our seaplanes went along with them. But I can't imagine what contribution they made.
I've always heard that was an incredible sight to be in one of these armadas and seeing all these ships and.
It is a real impressive sight, because in the center of the group you have these aircraft carriers, and then the other support ships are all the way around them. We had 3 or 4 aircraft carriers and 2 battleships, and I don't know how many cruisers and a bunch of destroyers.
So now you're transferred over to Yosemite. You're in the Philippines. Would you have the opportunity to have shore leave and go on into the Philippines at all, or
No, there was no place to go.
Oh, okay.
The closest town that had a name was Tacloban, and I never got there. And there was really no reason to go there. There wasn't anything to do or see. But I did see a Japanese school. Filipino school. It was a shelter made out of some kind of palm leaves. I believe they called it a bajillo. And a bunch of kids sitting under that, somebody lecturing them in Spanish, so I have no idea what was going on.
Hmm.
But I could go over on the beach, I believe every fourth day for about 3 hours. And sometimes I went and sometimes I didn't.
Is that where you get relief? I mean, you're down in this hot engine room. Not to mention you're in the hot tropics. Where would you get your relief from the heat?
You didn't. I had heat rash like I've never heard of before. And I went into sick bay one day and showed it to the medical officer. He looked at me. He said, "My God, man," but he never offered to do anything about it.
Wow.
I don't believe there was anything you could do about it. The one advantage I had there was while we were anchored there, I got a lot of opportunities to be on a boat running errands. And I've made trips that would take probably an hour and a half, and there'd be times it would rain so hard you couldn't see where you're going. 5 minutes later, the sun would just be scalding the hide right off your back.
Oh, jeez.
And your sleeping quarters.
Yeah. How was aside from being down in the engine room, what were general living conditions like for you as far as sleeping quarters and the food and entertainment? I mean,
Well, we had a bunk that we called a rack, and it was nothing but a pad with a cover like a big pillowcase. And we had a name for it, if I dare use it.
go ahead.
We called it a fart sack.
A fart sack.
And I got a double dose in the living compartment where I had a bunk. They had them stacked 4 high. And I had the top one right against the weather deck. And the sun would beat down on that thing all day long, and then I'd try to sleep in it when I got a chance. And there's another thing. The Navy thought that a guy could spend an entire career without sleeping. I like to tell people that I'm still catching up on the sleep that I lost in 1944.
Wow. How could you, when you look back on that, how do you think you managed to function with the lack of sleep like that and being down in those hot conditions?
Well,
I mean, it just seems like a bunch of things
it
hit
was
you at
just the
once.
fact that I was young enough that I could endure it. Today I wouldn't live that long.
Yeah. Wow.
But on the Oklahoma City, we were operating with steam that was 600 pounds pressure, and that's something that had never occurred to me, to have that much pressure. That was just out of this world. And the superheat temperature on it was 825 degrees. So
Would they move you in shifts where you could get out and get some relief? I mean,
we worked 4-hour shifts, 4 on and 8 off.
that still seems like a long time to be spending in those conditions.
Yeah,
but,
it is. And then once in a while, we would have to make repairs in an area where we didn't have direct ventilation. And then we could only work in 10 or 15-minute shifts.
Wow. Oh, yeah. How about the food on board? How'd you find that?
Well, I got a surprise right from day one in boot camp. I grew up in a situation where we were so poor that we could have qualified for care packages from somebody else. And I got in the Navy and they served pie twice a week. That was a real treat.
Yeah.
Our food was good. The preparation of it probably wasn't what Mother would have made, but it was still acceptable. I went into the Navy weighing 144 pounds and came out weighing 182
Oh, is that right?
in about 2 years.
Did you ever have, doing a number of these interviews, it seemed like a lot of these guys that were in the Pacific in particular and on ships always had a craving for something at home. Was there something you missed at home as far as a milkshake or real eggs or anything
I think I was too sleepy to think about it.
Oh, is that right?
Now, you mentioned eggs. We had powdered eggs.
Yeah.
They were awful.
Yeah.
We had powdered potatoes. That was awful. We had powdered milk. That was terrible also. But it was nourishing. We lived on it. We survived on it.
Yeah.
And I can't complain because when we were in San Pedro Bay, over the hill, there were a bunch of soldiers that were living on a whole lot less and had a whole lot more harsh living conditions.
Okay. Yeah. Being over there, were you able to get tropical fruit such as pineapple or
No,
bananas?
they wouldn't allow it.
Oh, was that right?
No.
Huh.
We had an outbreak of dysentery on the ship, and we were forbidden to eat anything off the local economy.
Hmm.
One guy came back with a monkey that he had bought off a Filipino, and I don't think that lasted 24 hours.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, he had to get rid of that.
How about on either one of the ships? Did you ever cross the equator and have to go through the polywog ceremony? No.
No. I got close, but I didn't get across it.
So
A guy that's been across it is a shellback.
what's that?
A guy that has been across the
Yeah, right,
is
right.
a shellback.
Right. And I heard that ceremony going from a polywog to a shellback is quite the ceremony.
It was nothing but hazing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So how long then did you spend there anchored in the Philippines? Were you there finish out the war there, or?
I was there when the war ended. And of course, when we got the word that the war ended, everyone started to celebrate.
Uh-huh.
And all the searchlights came on. Everything that was not lethal was fired. The Filipinos thought the Japanese were back. And the next day you couldn't find them.
So it must have been a great feeling to know, hey, I made it through this
Yeah.
thing and it's over
Yeah.
with. Yeah. Yeah.
Another thing that was in the back of my mind, and I think everybody else's mind, that war had gone on for so long. We didn't have any idea how long this was going to last.
Right, right.
We didn't know where we were going, or how long we would be at it.
Did that play on your mind? I mean,
Yeah.
those two facts that the uncertainty of things, it must have, or were you able to block it out, or I mean, it just seems like.
Well, I was aware of it, but I didn't dwell on it.
Yeah. How was communications back and forth from home as far as mail and stuff? I mean, with you guys traveling, were you able to get mail back and forth?
There's one I've got to mark up for the Navy and our mail service. We had mail. Of course, it was always a month late, but they would, no matter where we were, they would find us.
Hmm.
And I thought that was just absolutely amazing, because our ship was only one of several thousand that was out there.
Right.
And they were of all sizes and shapes. There were small craft like LSTs that were an entity unto themselves. They had to have a mail address somehow.
Yeah. And from your standpoint, writing back home, there wasn't a whole lot you could write about because you were
No.
censored pretty heavily, and
No. The big news is hot, we're having fun. Tomorrow's going to be like today. That's about all we could write about.
yeah, yeah. Were you getting word back from home as far as just home news, as far as sports events or what was going on back home? And was the Navy keeping you guys abreast on how the war was going? Were they?
No.
No? Huh.
No. I had no idea what was happening anyplace else.
Wow. That must have been strange.
We were about 6 or 8 days out of Philadelphia when we got word that President Roosevelt had died.
Oh, right, yeah.
And I think that's the only official word I ever heard all the time I was on a ship.
Never got word about VE Day in Europe?
Not officially.
Really? Huh, I'll be darned.
And when we got word that that the Japs had surrendered, we were watching a movie up on the boat deck, and the screen was attached to a bulkhead, and on the other side of the bulkhead was the communications department, which they called the radio shack. Some guy opened a porthole there, stuck his head out and hollered at us and said the war's over. Just that quick, the projector was shut off, the screen come down, and the party was on.
Oh, wow. So that was your big entertainment on the ship, was films mostly, or what else would you do with your free time?
They didn't give us a lot of free time.
Hmm.
But the movies were, in the crude conditions, they were first run movies back here.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh.
So I don't know whose generosity provided those films.
Huh.
And of course, we had a boat running around through the harbor, circulating the films.
Trading with other ships.
Yeah.
And, How about Tokyo Rose? You guys listen to Tokyo Rose at all? No.
No. We didn't have radios.
Wow. Man, I just can't believe that the true isolation you guys were in, really, in that regard. So now the war's announced it's over. Where do you guys go from there? Or are you there in the Philippines for a while, or did you guys?
We were in the Philippines for probably another 10 days or 2 weeks. We were there until the official surrender documents were signed. And we moved probably another day or two after that. And we headed north. Our destination was Sasebo, Japan. And en route we ran into the rear end of a typhoon. And there was another interesting experience.
Yeah, please. I've heard about this typhoon. Please tell the story.
Well, our ship was big enough that it didn't bother us a whole lot, but we were in a group. I don't believe you could call it a convoy, but we were in a group. We had some destroyers with us, and the sea was rough enough that there were times we could not see the destroyer and they could not see us. And the ship wasn't real bad about rolling, but it would pitch fore and aft. And there'd be times the front end of the ship would be plowing into the sea and the back end with the propellers out of the water.
Wow.
And I was still young enough and dumb enough to not be afraid, and I would sit back at the back end and marvel at how those propellers were making all that noise when they would come out of the water.
Wow. So you guys were heading to Japan as part of the occupation forces, or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we stopped at Okinawa overnight, I believe, in a place called Buckner Bay. And then we went on to Sasebo. That's on the south side of the island of Kyushu. And our ship was the second one into that harbor, which was a big Japanese naval base.
Oh, wow.
The ship immediately ahead of us was a minesweeper. And of all things, as we approached the harbor, they brought a Japanese harbor pilot aboard to guide our ship in. That just really blew me away, because he was the guy that 10 days before was our enemy.
Yeah, right. Huh. Wow.
And we tied up there. And we were there for, this was sometime in September, and we were there until February or March.
Is that right?
And the routine was literally the same there, only the weather was better. I lost my heat rash there.
Were you able to get liberty and go in and explore Japan at all, or?
Well, there wasn't anything to see. There was no transportation.
Hmm.
Japanese didn't have any gasoline. And in the town there, everything that I saw was crude. All I had there was a guided walking tour one day. And when we weren't making distilled water to run the ship and other ships, and I wiped a lot of grease in the engine room. I spent a lot of time at that. Otherwise, I was in a boat crew, and I got around all over the harbor. And that boat crew was really a blessing, because it got me away from that ship.
Oh,
In
boy.
every port we were in, I was in a boat crew, and I was able to get around. And we would haul Liberty parties around. They weren't going to do anything when they got ashore, but we hauled them over there anyway. And then our last Liberty run of the evening would be, we'd have to stop at an officers club that had been established there and pick up the officers. Some of them were real formal and you could tell it, and others, when we get there, we tie the boat up and say, come on in.
Oh, is that right?
They'd take us into the back room and give us a beer.
Huh.
And some of them wouldn't do that.
Yeah. Huh. Did you have much interaction with the locals, with the Japanese?
No, not at all.
Oh, okay.
On the day that we arrived there, or maybe the next day, we put our boats in the water and we had a boat boom we had to walk out on and climb down a Jacob's ladder to get to the boat. Well, as a Japanese boat came along and some guy came up that one of those ladders to come aboard the ship. And there was a first-class boatswain's mate ran out on that boat boom and he was going to hit the guy, and the guy offered him a piece of paper. And I can't recite the details in particular anymore, but that piece of paper was to our commanding officer, and they wanted to pick up our trash.
Huh.
That was a fringe benefit.
Yeah.
I don't know what would have happened to it otherwise.
Yeah.
So every day a boat would come alongside, powered by hand. And one day I happened to be nearby when this boat came alongside, and they had a wooden box full of spoiled candy. And all this box would be probably bigger than a bushel basket, and it was heavy. Well, they dropped it into that boat first on that bare deck. I thought, uh-oh, this is going to go right through. And it just bounced. Those Japanese really knew how to put a boat together to make it last.
Hmm.
And then on the one boat that where I was running the engine, it had recently had an overhaul and had a few quirks of its own. So we didn't pay any attention to the bells from the steering guy at the back. If we knew where we would go, we got to be pretty good cowboys with that big boat engine. We went into a dock, and I had the thing going just as hard as it would go. The trick was to wait till the last minute and then put it in reverse and open the throttle, and the boat would just sit there and shudder. Everything went real fine until I throttled back to change directions, and the engine died and it wouldn't restart. And here we were still going forward about 20 or 25 miles an hour. And there was a seawall right ahead of us. Well, between that engine stopping and the seawall, I could see myself being court-martialed. We hit that seawall and it made an awful noise. As you know, the boat never sprung a leak.
Huh.
So that got me off the hook on that one.
So you said you spent from September till February in Japan?
February or March, I don't remember
Okay.
which.
And then from there, now I guess I should have asked, because you were in the area and then eventually went up to the occupation force, was your ship slated to be part of the invasion, the planned invasion?
No, it would not. No, it was a support ship.
Oh, okay.
So it had no capability of attack.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay.
It had a bunch of guns on it for anti-aircraft protection.
Okay.
Oh, how about Nagasaki?
Well, when they decided we had been there long enough, the Navy, in their infinite wisdom, took us on a tour. We stopped first at Nagasaki,
Oh, really?
where the second atomic bomb had been dropped.
Describe the site there.
As I remember, the buildings, or what was left of them, they were out on the fringe area. At what they call ground zero, there was just nothing there. That was just completely destroyed. But these buildings were all pushed like some big windstorm had just pushed them all over. And there were still human bones laying around all over the place.
Wow. Wow. And they would take you on a tour of that? There was no worries of radiation or any?
No. I'm not sure they were aware of it.
Oh, okay.
And we went from there to some town near south of Tokyo. I don't remember the name of it. But we were about 50 or 60 miles from Tokyo. And I got a chance to get on the Japanese railroad and go into Tokyo. And they had that running, and it was running real good. I kind of have to admire their ability to run a railroad. And I had a one-day walking tour of Tokyo, which didn't get me around very far, but in the distance, probably 2 miles away, I could see the Emperor's Palace. And it had been spared. But Tokyo, the downtown part that I saw, was just totally destroyed. And there were just hundreds of people sleeping in the railroad terminal.
Wow.
Somehow it missed the bombing too. And then on the way back to the ship, was a Japanese conductor came through collecting fare, but we didn't pay fare either direction. So when this guy got near us, I and a couple other guys got the door open, got hold of him and threw him off.
Oh, is that right?
But we were stopped at a station,
Yeah.
so we just put him off. I assume he got back on another car.
That must, in all of your experience, I go back to the fact that, you know, you were a farm boy in Ohio, and now you traveled through the United States, went through the Panama Canal, Hawaii, the Philippines, traveled to Japan. It must have been an eye-opening experience for
Oh
you.
yeah, it was.
Yeah.
Like I say, everything was a big gee whiz experience.
Yeah, yeah.
I'd never seen anything like this.
Sure. So then after your tour of Japan, then did you guys start back for the States, or where'd you go from there?
We started back, our destination was the Brooklyn Navy Yard, and we made 2 stops. One was in the Hawaiian Islands, Pearl Harbor, and we had a bunch of guys left the ship there. The point system for discharge had already been put into effect,
Okay.
and we had a bunch of them that were eligible to go home. So they let them off there, and we got some new guys to take their place. And then we stopped in Balboa, Panama, and we were there a couple or 3 days. We all got a chance to go ashore. So I went downtown and had a walking tour of Panama City. And that was just not exactly like taking a walk downtown in New York City. Panama City is rather crude.
Oh, is that right?
Was then and it is now. It was to me anyway.
Yeah, yeah. And then after your stop in Panama, then you guys continued on to the Brooklyn Naval Yard, or?
Yes. Yeah, we
Okay.
didn't make any more stops.
Okay. And then once you guys docked up there, was it nice? It must have been nice to be back in the States, I would imagine.
Our first stop was at an ammunition storage facility at Bayonne, New Jersey. That's just outside the harbor. So we had to remove all of our explosives. So we had ammunition to supply the destroyers as they needed it. But we had to unload all that stuff to go into we were going into a dry dock.
Okay.
And as we were going up the Hudson River, I happened to be off duty right at that point, so I got up on top and I got as high as I could legally go on that ship to see how much room we had under the Brooklyn Bridge.
Oh, wow.
And I thought we were going to lose a radar antenna, but there was a lot of room.
Oh, okay.
And when we got to Brooklyn Navy Yard, we were there 2 or 3 days and they put the ship in dry dock for repairs.
That give you a chance then to go into New York City and,
Yeah.
and such, and
Every chance I got, I went downtown in New York.
I mean, even that alone, if you just did that alone, must have been from small country boy to big city.
Oh yeah, it was awesome. It was awesome.
Yeah. Did you take in any shows or do anything like that? Or,
Well, yeah, but I'm almost ashamed to admit it. I went into a theater to see the Marx Brothers play in Duck Soup. As far as Broadway, I didn't know such
sure. Yeah.
such entertainment existed.
Yeah. Yeah.
was taken off the ship there. Well, first I got a telegram. My mother was in the hospital.
Mm.
So I immediately applied for a leave and was granted. I went home. And 2 or 3 days after I got home, we lost her. So
Oh, boy.
I was at home for her funeral anyway. Then I went back to the ship, and I'm going to guess maybe a week or 2 or 3, I was eligible for separation. So they put me in a receiving barracks in the Brooklyn Navy Yard. And in the foyer there was a public telephone, and that thing rang constantly. And anyone available would answer it. Well, I had my turn one day. Some broad on the other end, she was looking for Jean Green. Doesn't that name sound a little phony?
Yeah.
I said, I'm Green, what can I do for you? So we made arrangements to meet downtown. She told me where to go. It was in Brooklyn. She called it the Green Square. Well, I expected to find some kind of a bar when I got off the bus. But here it was a city block with perfect lawn. So I stood around there a little bit. After a while, another bus stopped, and some good-looking young lady, about 20 or 21 years old, got off, and she came walking over to me. And she says, "Are you Green?" And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "Now, what's your real name?" So she took me on a tour of one of the sightseeing buses around New York. We spent the whole afternoon together and then went to see Duck Soup. Never heard from her again.
Is that right?
Well, that was all right, you know.
Yeah, yeah. So you got your separation papers now, and
Well, I had to do some guard duty. I had to guard the clothesline.
Oh, jeez.
They find some way, you know, to keep you occupied. It's amazing the little tricks that they can come up with to keep you from being idle. And then one day we had to take sandpaper, this clothesline. Of course, in the Navy parlance, it's a dryer. That wire clothesline was rusty, so we had to sand the rust off the clothesline. There's another inspiring assignment.
Yeah.
And when it came my turn to leave, they gave us, a whole bunch of us, tickets on the Erie Railroad to go back to Great Lakes for separation. And of all things, we were 8 hours late before we got out of the state of New York. And en route, we went through my hometown.
Oh, is that right?
Got to wave at the natives as we went by. We didn't stop.
Jeez.
There's one thing that I left out. When I went from Great Lakes to Philadelphia, we went through my hometown, and I knew that was on the Pennsylvania Railroad, and I knew that when we got there, they would stop that train to change engines and crews. So I called home and told my folks when and where I was going to be there, which was about 2 o'clock in the morning. But when the train stopped, they were standing on the platform.
Oh, wow.
Well, that was the last time I saw my mother on her feet.
Oh, jeez.
But we got to Great Lakes and went through the process of being separated. Had to take a physical examination, which amounted to nothing. And when we were given our papers, we were told that if we would stop at that desk at the back of the room, some guy there with a desk and a chair and a stack of papers, if we'd stop there, we could re-enlist. Of course, we gave him the old Navy boo. The guy said dismissed, and from that minute on, they never bothered us.
Huh.
I walked out the gate, found transportation down to the railroad station. I don't know how, but I got there. And I got home a couple of days later. And right back on the farm. My dad was left with 4 little kids that he had to raise alone. 154 acres. So I helped him through the summer.
How was that transition going in relation to that question I asked you in the beginning? How was it, the transition from military life to civilian life for you? Was that much of a
It took about 15 minutes.
Oh, did it? Okay.
It was just, by the next morning, it was just almost like I'd never been away.
Really?
Yeah. Because the routine was exactly the same. The cows looked the same. We plowed the same fields. Really nothing had changed except my mother wasn't there.
Yeah. Oh boy. And so you stayed on the farm for the summer helping your dad then
Yeah.
through harvest and whatnot? And
Yeah. Then in the autumn, I started looking for work. Having been exposed to steam, I thought that's the way to go. I was really impressed with those big engines.
Okay.
I went to work firing steam locomotives on the Pennsylvania Railroad. My idea was great, but my timing was way off. They started buying diesel engines. Wasn't very long till they didn't have work for me. I strung along with them for a long time and finally gave it up and went into the electrical industry. And I guess that's been my main source of income for the rest of my life.
What did you do in the electrical industry then?
Well, I became an electrician,
Oh, did you? Okay. Okay.
among a few other things.
Yeah.
I've been able to pick up a few other talents along the way. I spent 2 years as a police officer.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
And you mentioned earlier that you were kind of partial to Panama because you were down there for 2 years. Did a job take you down there, or?
I went down there to work as a maintenance electrician on the Atlantic locks.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh,
I was down there 2 years.
that must have been interesting.
Well, it was hot again,
Yeah, yeah,
but not like being in an engine room.
yeah. I can't imagine. So you were more of an industrial type engineer or electrician or a residential or what kind of?
Well, I've done a lot of both.
Okay.
I've done a lot of both construction and maintenance. In Panama, it was all maintenance.
Let's talk a little bit about your family. Tell us about meeting your wife and talk about your children and such.
Well, it was 2 or 3 years after I got out of the Navy. I met a good-looking young blonde at a skating rink. I used to roller skate when I was still in school. And we dated for a long time, and after a while we got married. And it lasted 20 years, about maybe a year or two longer than that. And we finally went different ways.
Okay.
You had one son.
I had one son by that marriage, and now I have 3 granddaughters. But a couple of years after we separated, I met Alma, my present wife, and I'm eternally glad that I met her.
And then what brought you out here to Colorado?
Well, I had been here a couple of times on vacations, and I'd learned to like it. So I decided this is where I want to be someday. I didn't have a particular spot in mind, but I just knew I wanted to be in this climate.
And how long you guys lived here? Did you retire out here, or did you work out here, or?
Well, I retired at Washington, D.C. I was working for American Airlines at National Airport on a maintenance job. Of course, I knew enough about Colorado that I didn't have to ask any questions. So I retired, and Alma retired about a year later, and then we moved here, and we built this house. I say we because she was a big assistance.
Yeah. And you guys said you built it yourself, right? Is that
Yeah.
wow?
She was busy all the time, carrying lunch, paying bills, ordering material, and she did a lot of painting.
And you guys have enjoyed your retirement?
Yes, we've done a lot of traveling since we've been retired. Thanks to the Navy and our own endeavors, we have had our feet in all 50 states.
Oh, wonderful. Have you ever had a chance to go back overseas to the Philippines or Hawaii or any other places that you'd been stationed at?
We stopped off in Honolulu one time 4 or 5 years ago. We were on a cruise, and we saw the Arizona Memorial,
Mm.
and we went on board the old battleship Missouri. But that's about as close as I've come to the Navy since I got out.
Yeah.
I've been to several ship reunions.
Keep in touch with any of your buddies from that period of time at all, or
Not really.
yeah?
There's a couple of guys that I kept in touch with for 3 or 4 years, then I dropped it.
Yeah.
And I tried to reestablish contact with one that was from Wyoming. I found him on the internet, and the internet's not perfect. They had the name and his age right, but he had died about 15 years ago.
Oh, is that right? Huh. Did you ever have any effects from that time being down in those conditions in the engineering room and the heat rash? Has any of that bothered you to this day? Or
No.
Oh, okay, good,
No.
good.
Now, when you're young, you can soak up a lot of abuse and get over it.
Well, Al, we'll start to wind down this interview. Is there anything that I didn't ask you that you wanted to talk about? And please, if there's any stories that you've heard that he didn't.
He's told them all.
Okay, good. If there's anything else that you can think of that you wanted to talk about, or so we can make sure we got as much of your story down as possible.
Well, everyone likes to brag about their grandchildren, but I digress.
Okay. And you've got the 3, you just said?
Yeah,
Any great grandchildren?
no.
Okay.
But these 3 granddaughters are all adults now. That's kind of a reflection on how old I am.
Yeah. Well, one
I
question.
ran into one guy at a ship reunion that was on the Yosemite with me. And I related a story that had taken place when he and I were in downtown New York City. And by the time I got done with that, he said, I knew exactly what you were going to say.
Oh, is that right?
The other details are not worth recording.
Oh, okay.
So his memory was as good as mine.
Yeah. Well, one question I always like to close with, or towards the end of these interviews, is how do you think that period of time when you're in the service played a role in your life? Did it change it at all, change your thinking, change your life at all? Or was it just simply a chapter of your life that you went through? How would you answer that?
I think it has influenced me in subtle ways. Probably the military discipline. Because after I got working at the airport, I had lots of opportunities to be in a vehicle, drive a vehicle and go from one place to another on the airport. And I always made it a point to stay within the marked vehicle lanes. Well, because I followed those things religiously, I had a guy accuse me of being a Nazi. He said, whatever came down the tube, you would do it. So let him have his opinion. A few weeks later, we had a guy taking a shortcut. He ran into the wing of an airplane. They fired him on the spot.
Huh.
So I think the rules are set there for a purpose.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. 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 Well, lastly, is there anything, any closing statement you would like to make to cap off this interview that family and friends who may watch you someday that you'd like to say to, or not? Is there any closing statement you'd like to make? Kind of an open mic type of thing, or not, as well.
Oh, I don't believe there's anything worthwhile adding to it.
Okay.
I've already said all I know.
All right. Very good. Well, I want to thank you for sitting down to tell your story today, but more importantly, I want to thank you for your service to our country.
Thank you.